Good morning, everyone. Well, at least good morning to those in my part of the world, in the Southern Hemisphere. And good afternoon and good evening to the rest of you up north. Welcome to our morning meditation and Q&A. I hope you're all doing well. We'll just wait a couple of minutes for people to drop in and catch up on who's here. Once again, nice to see people from everywhere, all over the planet, dropping in. Someone from the Caribbean today, Northumberland, Brazil, Scotland, Wales, Northern Rivers, Sydney. Chile, the US, France. Bonsoir. Austria, Kansas, Florida, Canada, England. It's wonderful. Blue Mountains, Tasmania, all parts of the US. Great to see you all, at least virtually. So, whatever time it is where you find yourself, we can be assured that it's always now. We're all connecting here and now, whatever the outer conditions are. Great, lots of people dropping in. Welcome, everybody. So today is our regular guided meditation with an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. So we'll get started with that now. So wherever you find yourself, in whatever room, in whatever part of the world, with whatever conditions you may be experiencing, whatever the situation around you, you can always connect with the sense of the body, connect with the sense of the space that you're in, as a means for just centering in the present moment, centering here and now. So the way we can do that, we can lower the eyes a little bit, bringing your attention to the body. And without trying to force any particular experience or change anything in this moment, just bring awareness, attention to the experience of body as it is in this moment. It just is as it is. We just want to let that be in awareness. And initially, you become aware of the mental movement of the mind in a kind of a momentum. As you turn your attention to physical sensation, to be aware of physical sensation, you also notice the movement of the mind by contrast, mental movement. So just noticing that. So when I say be aware of the body, it doesn't mean we try to push everything out, everything else out of our awareness. But sensation, physical sensation, can become the anchor, the point in the moment wherein we can center our attention. So that can be the sensations of sitting, the points of pressure on the body, where you're sitting against the cushion or the chair. The sense of the body in a particular posture, taking a particular shape, how the limbs are folded, how the arms, hands are resting. And as you recognize these physical sensations, you might recognize some points of pain or tension in the body. You may adjust your posture to allow a deeper sense of ease and relaxation. And you'll naturally notice the movement of the breath as the body breathes, the movement of air in and out of the lungs. This process of breathing that's been with us from the moment of birth, taking in nourishment from the air, from the environment around us. The body breathes. Constant respiration, taking in nutriment, expelling the used air. This constant movement of the breath, ever new in each moment. It becomes so familiar to us that we tend to ignore it, completely take it for granted until perhaps a time where it becomes more difficult to breathe or painful to breathe for whatever reason. So we're just starting to notice this interaction of this body with the environment. Completely dependent on the elements, dependent on nutriment from the air element, moment by moment. See if you can relax, allow the body just to breathe by itself. That might sound strange because that's what it's doing, but we often have a subtly imposed control on the movement of the breath. So just allow yourself to relax around the breath. Let the breath do what it does. Whether it's slow or deep, short or shallow, it changes. Feel all the movement of the body as it naturally takes in air and expels air. See if you can completely relax any sense of control or holding around this experience of breathing. All the while just noticing how that is. So noticing doesn't mean controlling or fixing, simply noticing the experience in and around the breath, the body breathing. And you'll notice some movements of attention as it loses interest in, excuse me. So even coughing or tightness in the throat is an aspect of the movement of breath. Excuse me. The shifting and changing expressions of body and breath. So, as I said, you can experience the fluctuation of attention as it shifts. It may lose interest in body and breath, shift focus to thoughts or sounds. So we just notice that when that happens. Simply knowing the movement of attention. This is natural for a mind that has been conditioned to pay attention to multiple things in the environment. So when we first start to meditate, whether we're experienced or not, initially we notice the movement of attention can be quite rapid and fleeting, somewhat like a a butterfly visiting many different flowers, seemingly not still for very long. The fluttering of attention settling on a sound or a sight, a memory, a thought, a sensation. Seemingly led by just the various noises in the sense field, the things that arise. But as we establish the intention to ground attention, to center attention more initially within one focus, one primary focus, the breath or the body, we're actually allowing the attention to come to more of a rest, a natural stillness. It'll flit for a while. That's natural. And mindfulness is about remembering and reminding that our intention is to let our attention settle, to keep returning to one point, not by force, just by remembering there is this. So we don't push any sense experience away. We recognize and remember. Recognize what's happening, what's present. And remember to connect with body and breath. So that's one and the same movement. It doesn't have to be a push-pull. We're not pushing something away. We're not even returning to the breath, though that is often the phrase used. Simply remembering there is this. It's a shift of perception in an open field of awareness. And then allowing a restfulness, not as in sleepiness, but as in centering, stilling, in open awareness. Just like when the butterfly finds a beautiful sunflower, and stays for a while. So the breath appears and disappears. And as the mind and body calm a little, you notice there's more spaces between the in and the out breath. The body-mind doesn't need to consume so much resources when it finds the degree of stillness. And to sustain attention in the present, we can start to notice the space between the breaths, the space between the end of the out breath and the beginning of the next in breath. The space element, perceiving the space element. It's not an empty experience. There's the end of the out breath, subtle sensations, and then the space element, spaciousness, and a new in breath with its subtle sensations. We also notice the body and the mind in its feeling of calming. This feeling tone of calming down, relaxing. It's a pleasant feeling. The body enjoys that relaxation. The mind also enjoys that relaxation. So we notice this aspect as well. It's naturally pleasant. This samatha, this calming, tranquility, no matter in what measure you may feel it, a little or a lot. This is the encouragement of the Buddhas to allow the mind to calm, allow the body to calm. It's part of the deepening of the meditation in a natural flow. We continue to be aware of the movement of breath, breath sensation, pleasant physical sensation, peripheral awareness of sound coming, going. We allow the body-mind to continue to rest into this natural calm, this natural stillness, even within the field of sense experience, not blocking. But staying centered means having a point, a skillful point of reference in the present. And for that, we're using the body, the breath, and now this feeling of calm itself. And the increasing sense of space, spaciousness, perception of space, space between breath. Space of now, here. Notice that the space we notice space doesn't come and go in the same way as breath or sound or sensations. When we recognize or perceive the space, experience of spaciousness, it doesn't have a boundary. All appearances, all sensations, sounds, thoughts, they come and go. Noticing the space element allows a letting go, a non-attachment, a non-clinging to sensory experiences. You can stay present without holding to any particular thing. You can start to notice awareness itself. The underlying awareness, continuous with space. The knowing element. It's an element that's ever present. It's not something we can create or become. It's not something we achieve through trying. It's simply an aspect of nature, as is space element and the other elements. But it's a boundless quality like space. You can't find an edge to it. It just is. And you can learn to relax into this perception of awareness, as we do with the perception of space. Allow the mind to open and relax into, rest into awareness itself. Sense cognition still comes and goes. Sound, thought, sensation. The knowing of momentary sensation, momentary sense experience. When it's not grasped, pulled towards one or pushed away. It's like a ripple within the field, within the ocean of awareness. this awareness, it's ever present, whether mind recognizes it or not. But when you come to recognize it and experience directly, it's a direct tasting of what is, the direct meeting of deep knowing. That establishes a confidence and a trust that there is this. And when you seem to lose your balance or direction in the throes of busy life, you can learn to simply remember there is this, ever present, not delayed in time. In fact, timeless. Not found in any one place, but accessible everywhere, all the time. Remembering this is a doorway, a portal, a place of letting go, letting be, of waking up from the dream. So allowing your awareness of what is to remember the body, the breath, to come more fully into this embodied experience and into this relational field that we have via the internet, as it's time to discuss the Dharma, to respond to any questions you have, and to just enjoy some time together as Sangha, exploring the Dharma. So thank you for your attention and presence in this meditation. So any questions that people might have, pop it into the chat and we can go through them. I notice the first one there, what is consciousness? Excuse me, I'll just have some water. Good question, because the word consciousness gets used in many different ways. So different traditions will, well, firstly, consciousness is a translation of some of the old Sanskrit and Pali terms. And be aware that different translations, different English words are used to translate the one Sanskrit or Pali word. And even in the language we have of the Buddha's teachings, and from what we understand through the suttas that are recorded as the Buddha's teachings, he can even use this word in Pali. What gets translated as consciousness is vijnana. You can use this word in different ways, in different contexts. And it's not an easy thing to define, as you might imagine, when we're looking at the ultimate nature of things. And it defies description ultimately, and that too is articulated in the Buddha's teachings. Words can only ever be approximate, and words are very culturally conditioned. So different words at different times in different cultures can actually evoke different meanings. So we must be aware of that. But simply put, within my own understanding, so as we don't, we could talk forever about consciousness in its different aspects and its different expressions, different meanings. From my understanding, within the Buddhist tradition, we have the word vijnana, consciousness. It gets translated as consciousness or sense consciousness. When the Buddha talks about vijnana, he's talking about the 6 sense consciousnesses, being consciousness that arises through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing with the mind, or thinking with the mind, as in mano. Mano is the Pali word for mind, which is usually associated with intellectualization, ideation, the mental movement of mind. Mind is another word which has a broad application. So vijnana, consciousness, sense consciousness, is always related to the senses in the Buddha's teaching. We can be aware of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, thoughts, knowing, cognition. These are the 6 fields, sense fields, wherein we see consciousness to arise and cease. And the Buddha's encouragement is to notice the arising and ceasing of consciousness. So in this sense, this is consciousness which is conditioned. It only arises due to the functioning sense faculty, a particular sense object, and when it's noticed within the field, it arises with what we call sense contact. So this is the momentary consciousness, the way we use consciousness as in sense consciousness. And one of the older translations was cognition, that momentary cognition of something seen, heard, sensed, or cognized. This is sense consciousness. And we also use this, I can often use the word awareness or awareness itself. There is that kind of knowing which does not arise and cease in the same way as sense consciousness is known to arise and cease. And this is a meditative discernment, something discerned in a meditative sense, but it can be recognized momentarily and yet not sustained. But the practice or the whole spiritual trajectory is to recognize that that awareness, as I was discussing or pointing to in the meditation, is an aspect of nature that is contiguous, ever present, continuous. And we notice with sense consciousness, we can notice it or not. That noticing is a moment of cognition, sense consciousness, which is conditioned. But what it notices is that which is unconditioned, not bound by conditions, not dependent on anything else for its being or reality. So this is where words start to fail, because words are dualistic constructs or create dualistic constructs. As soon as we say it's an it or a thing or an experience, it moves into the field of something that can be experienced, which is inevitably conditioned. So I'll just say that much for now, and say that different traditions, different teachers will use these words differently. Awareness, consciousness. Some will use both for the unconditioned reality and also for the conditioned reality. Some will deny an unconditioned awareness in certain traditions, and some may even reify it into a something. So this is the territory of insight where one's wisdom and discernment must be honed through practice and through direct insight to understand how this reality is, what the conditioned and the unconditioned, the words conditioned and unconditioned, are pointing to. Words are limiting, words are ultimately creating concepts. So ultimately we have to see past those or see their limitations. They're just pointers, pointing to a reality to be known and seen directly for a deep understanding, a transformative understanding to occur. So I'll just point you to our website, where on the Q&A page there's quite a few different questions, like around consciousness or the difference between consciousness and awareness. So go to our website and have a look at our Q&A, and you might, obviously there's more discussion there. But just know that each tradition, each teacher might use these words differently to point to different aspects of experience. So don't get too hung up on the actual word, even though we all do at some time in our practice, because it becomes a very important discernment to be made. Ultimately, we can only find that for ourselves. So I hope that helps somewhat. So I'll come back. How can you hold the supreme? It comes and goes for me. There's no holding of it. If we try to hold it, it will come and go, because there's trying to grasp a perception, which is inevitably fleeting. So some of what I just said might have helped you discern the difference between conditioned and unconditioned there. What doesn't come and go and what does come and go. Momentary sense cognition always comes and goes. It's the way we know things conceptually, but that function is part of the conditioned world. Now, when I talk about conditioned and unconditioned, and this is a trap that we all can fall into, you can create a new duality. There's the unconditioned. I have to get to that and eschew anything conditioned. This is not actually the way it works. This is a way of discerning in order to facilitate understanding. But this has to be taken into your experience, into your meditative experience, to be seen directly, for true understanding to emerge. Because in the ultimate view of things, the conditioned and the unconditioned are not separate. They're not dualities. And in, say, the Ati Yoga approach or way of expression, the conditioned experiences are seen to be expressions of the true nature, not separate, just as waves and ripples are on the surface of the ocean. They're not separate from the ocean. We can discern them as individual waves and ripples and know that just those individual waves and ripples are not in and of itself representative of the whole of the ocean in one respect. One wave which appears and disappears, one movement of energy. Is that the ocean? In one respect, we can say it is not other than the ocean, but is it the experience of the whole? This is where words and concepts cut things up, but the experience, ultimately speaking, is not two, not separate. Yet, wise discernment sees the arising and the ceasing of things, and ultimately understands the freedom found in not grasping, in not fixing, in not concretizing, not reifying thingness as opposed to non-thingness. So Ellen asks, I felt bliss and chill so much when I held the Supreme and had like a point. I could just feel it, and then it disappeared and anxiety came back to the heart for some reason. So these things, yes, we glimpse it momentarily. Let's say within our normal stream of conscious awareness, this practice that we engage in allows us to glimpse that which doesn't come and go. The fact that we can't yet sustain that awareness doesn't mean that it's not present. It just means that our conditioned attention, like that butterfly, is just now moving with a lot of, different energy. Now going here, going there, the various sense experiences arising in the field capture our attention. And it will, because that's exactly how the mind is conditioned. Whatever we pay attention to within our mind stream creates patterns. Whatever we pay attention to creates patterns. And so just as you, say, imagine in the sand near the ocean, you draw with your finger, you make a mark in the sand. Or in any, it doesn't have to be by the ocean, in the earth, anywhere, you make a mark in the earth, and when it rains, the water starts traveling down that channel because it's a mark that's been made, and so it's easy for water to travel down that channel. And the more it travels down that channel, the bigger the groove becomes, right? So you see this on the roads everywhere. When water starts to move just down one little groove, the more it moves, the deeper the groove. And then, our earth is covered with deep canyons carved out by rivers over the eons, well, centuries at least, millennia. So applying this to the mind, wherever attention goes, if it it creates a pattern. There's an energetic pattern, and it will continue to move there more easily, perhaps, than other places. So this is, these are neuronal connections, if you like. And each of us can recognize any addictive behaviors in our lives. The more attention goes a certain place, the more it will continue to go there. And we think, oh, I've lost control. I can't help what's happening. At one level, mind is pulled there. But we can be aware of this. And as soon as we're aware of that, something has rested out of that momentum. So this is a practice of mindfulness, to become aware of what's happening. The more awareness, momentary mindfulness to recognize what's happening, it starts to shift the energy. Not necessarily through some other desire to make another mark some other way, but we can work with addictive patterns in that way, to create another mark, to allow the water, a more skillful intention and attention, more skillful behavior, to allow the water to move allow the energy to move in another direction. So this is how we can work with, say, addictive behavior patterns. We can work with that in that way. But we also need mindfulness for that. We need to recognize what's happening and to learn to place attention through skillful intention. And so this is happening on a subtle level when we keep remembering the breath, the body here and now. In that moment, it dissolves the energy moving out in all different directions in a conditioned way. When we remember the breath, the body, very neutral experiences here and now, whether it initially feels pleasant or painful, it just is, just paying attention to what is. Allows the dissolving of habitual patterns. And mindfulness, the Buddha said, is the most skillful of, what word did he use? Just a skillful dhamma, a skillful mind state. It allows the dissolving of habitual patterns, allows the dissolving of ignorance, of unawareness, which fuels habitual patterns. And unawareness particularly allows habitual patterns that result in suffering to continue. As long as we're not aware of how this works, how conditioning and how the conditioned mind works, we don't understand how to free the mind from suffering. So mindfulness is the path, is the way, not through push and pull, but through awareness itself, relying on the natural element of awareness to start to see, to start to dispel ignorance, unawareness. How do I see what my mind is doing right now? Just see it. Awareness is there. We have direct experience. What is your mind doing right now? You're paying attention to my words, hopefully. You're construing the sounds that you hear into meaning through my words. The mind is conditioned through language, the learning of language and meaning concepts, to be able to understand conceptually what I'm saying. And without awareness, you wouldn't be able to do that. Without awareness, there'd be no consciousness, there'd be no anything. So how do I see what my mind is doing right now? Just awareness. Be aware. Ask the question, what is my mind doing now? And remove the my. What is the mind? The mind doing now? What is mind doing now? Often it's involved in seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. In fact, that's the extent of the mind's movement, the mind's habitat. There is nothing outside of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, and knowing that mind can experience. So this is a very useful paradigm to recognize what's going on right now. Am I seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, knowing? Mind's attention is shifting between these sense spaces regularly. But as I said, there is that which comes and goes, recognized through sense consciousness, and that which is more the field we can perceive as the field of awareness or the ground of being, which does not have the same characteristic as sense consciousness, coming, going. Is it effortless for one to realize one's own Buddha nature, or in other words, the Dharmakaya? Is that what Dzogchen is? Dzogchen is, yes. Ultimately, one says it speaks of effortlessness in this realization. If you're trying to see something, often that trying muddies the water. So the whole trajectory is one of resting into open awareness, mindfulness, awareness, present moment awareness, and just seeing, just knowing, recognizing. Is awareness related to the sense of distance? Sometimes while meditating with eyes open, I feel the sense of things being near, far to me, near or far to me, collapse. What is this? Well, that's just a sense of time and space collapsing, because ultimately it's a conceptual construct, time, space. It's when we hear the bird now chirping in the tree. We hear a sound, we experience sound waves. Functioning ear door picks up the vibration. It's transformed into what we call sound internally at the eardrum and through the brain. We've learned, the mind has learned to recognize a sound as a bird, maybe as a magpie or a wattle bird or something else that's perceptual. But we also learn to approximate a sense of a distance from this body. Oh, it's just in the tree outside my room, based on the characteristics of that sound, or it's further afield. That's also interpretation. And so internally, mind creates a sense of distance based on interpretation, based on a sense of identification with this body in space, being me and mine, as one point in space, one point in awareness, and that sound emerging, we create a sense of distance, approximating distance. In terms of the conditioned world, this is helpful. This is good functioning of the mind, because if you hear a car racing up the street behind you and it's loud and it's moving fast, you want to really step off the road. It's good information to function in reality. So we're not saying this is a complete falsehood at all. It's part of the conditioned world and learning how to function and survive as a being, biological being within this environment. But as you perceive, sometimes while meditating, whether eyes are open or not, you feel the sense of things being near or far to you collapse. So what's collapsing there is the mental construct, which is creating that perception. This is why it's important not to meditate while you're driving. Just stay with mindfulness of driving. When you're meditating, we can allow, as the mind is coming into stillness, these various sense impressions and the mental constructions created from those sense impressions, which reinforce subject, object, time, and place, can start to relax and unfold. And this is where we see directly the conditioned nature of experience, and that it has a relative reality, but it's not an ultimate reality. They're conditioned perceptions. So it's not ultimate in that it doesn't sustain, it collapses. But this is a good insight. Sometimes it can take time for the insights we get to be fully comprehended, to fully mature, so as we understand what's going on. But this is a really good insight. And this happens naturally. So there's nothing, some people can feel fear arising when that sense of time, space, subject, object starts to open out. And so we just work with that. It's just a momentary perception arising from egoic sense of me facing disappearance. But that's just a thought too. It arises and ceases. Ultimately, when things relax like this, the conceptual constructs collapse or open out, one tastes a sense of freedom from the limitations of being identified with the subject as opposed to the object, with here as opposed to there, these dualistic constructs of mind. Ultimately, when we experience the mind relaxing out of that, it's a sense of freedom, a sense of recognizing the deeper layers of reality that may still be constructed to some degree, but much less so. So even, as aware when I was guiding the meditation, the perception of space, the perception of consciousness, in the Buddha's paradigm, as the mind, elements of mind refine in samadhi, even these the perception of space is a construct. The perception of consciousness, boundless consciousness or boundless space, are subtle perceptual constructs. The perception of nothingness is a subtle conceptual construct. The more the mind in meditative process recognizes constructs and rests out of them, not by any desire or will to do so, but purely through seeing the way things are, recognizing appearance, disappearance, or the transitoriness of perception constructs. Gradually, there is just this refinement of both perception and then understanding, so there can be this breakthrough as the mind's own environment clarifies, as mindfulness clarifies the muddy waters as things settle naturally, then an understanding of the real, true nature of being, of existence, can be understood. Sorry, I can get a bit long-winded with these answers, but I'm hoping that they're speaking to a lot of you. Does touching into presence and awareness typically come and go? Or can they come to be something more continuous, such as Turiya? This is the Advaita word, Turiya, Advaita language for, I think, more sustained, unconditioned awareness. With Turiya, do sensory experiences still come and go? So you would have gleaned a lot of what I've already said speaks to that question. But in my understanding, this difference when we start to look at conditioned sense consciousness, it will always come and go. It's part of embodied existence, part of this karmic existence. So even for the fully awakened being, and I'm not identifying myself at all with a fully awakened being, so I can only speculate. But from my understanding of hearing so many teachings from awakened beings in their different ways, what I understand is this sense consciousness. It still comes and goes, but for the fully awakened being, they're not at all fooled by that. The mind is no longer finding identity there. So its experience is a very fluid thing that is not causing any suffering anymore. It comes and goes. It's fully understood for what it is in its functionality, in its karmic manifestations, in its appearances. It's not taken to be who and what I am, because that being has penetrated to the very root of existence and understanding of the conditioned and the unconditioned. Their mind is no longer disturbed by that which comes and goes. Now, it doesn't mean, the Buddha talked about still experiencing feeling, but with a certain quality of detachment is one word, but let's say it's more non-clinging, a quality of it not snagging. It just is. And so it doesn't stand out as something that you either identify with. It's certainly understood in a conventional sense. The Buddha understood the feelings of his body as that arising from this karmic manifestation, but it wasn't clung to or identified with, wasn't pushed away, wasn't attached to. And so it was fully understood. But it doesn't mean to say certain feelings didn't arise, just didn't create any suffering at all. And so perhaps they were felt more as just very minimal fluctuations on the surface of things. The peace of resting in purity or awakened awareness is the, how can we say, the true state of, it's a true state of all of us, but the awakened being is able to rest there. I may be incorrect, but my teacher told me once that vijnana literally means to split apart, know apart. V is split or divide, and jnana is to know. Is this accurate? It is. It's one way of looking at the word vijnana. That's absolutely right. In Pali or Sanskrit, you can split words up into their different conjuncts, and you can sometimes get slightly different meanings, and this is one very important meaning which I think is relevant. So to me, I relate to this aspect of vijnana. Knows in pairs, it knows in two, subject, creates a sense of subject-object. So at this level, this conditioned vijnana, it's one word that gets used by one monk, a kind of bifurcation of experience. So there is an experience, and then it splits into subject, object, here, there. That's the dualistic kind of knowing of things. And it's true in the relative sense, in terms of sense experience, subject, object. But there's that which knows that this sense experience is just that, and it can be seen, discerned, to arise and cease. It appears and disappears. It's very momentary. And this is exactly what the Buddha is, within the suttas, is encouraging his disciples, particularly those who are already have the insight into the path, is to develop one's practice to recognize the arising, to observe the arising and ceasing of the khandhas, the 5 upadana khandha, and the khandhas being form, physical form, the elements, feeling, perception, mental formations, and sense consciousness. So consciousness is the 5th group of experience. Actually, another word for vijnana can be experience, that which is experienced. Experience is a momentary taste of a particular sense experience, but it's inevitably momentary. There's no sense experience which stays. And this is the characteristic of vijnana, as in conditioned sense consciousness. So I hope that helps clarify. Would you kindly speak to the difference between Buddhism and non-duality, Advaita, Sri Ramana, Sam Harris, Dennis Hoffman, Nisargadatta, etc.? Well, there's differences and there's sameness. The differences lay in the choice of language, slightly different traditions. All traditions develop their own language, their own culture. But the truth of what we call Advaita, non-duality, the truth of the Buddha Dharma, is actually all pointing to the very same truth. Ultimately, there's no difference between the pointing. Well, difference is in the pointing at the words, so they're different, but what it's pointing to is not different. And so different words, different paradigms, different concepts can seem to set up a different pathway of access to this insight, which is fair enough. There's many paths up the mountain, to use an old, rather hackneyed turn of phrase. But that's exactly how these things develop. But the truth is the truth, and the truth can be discerned, has to be discerned within our own frame of reference. The Buddha was clear that there is no realization if it's not penetrated or understood personally. So we can hear, we can listen to a great teacher, we can understand their teachings and the path intellectually, and they have a perfect map in our mind. But without direct penetration, that map is pretty useless if it's not really used, if we don't really walk the territory to the full realization. Another analogy that often gets used, it's like, if you just save the recipe and don't actually cook the meal and eat it, you'll never be satisfied. You just end up with a bunch of recipes. And it might be tantalizing and exciting to read through them and imagine the food, imagine eating it. That's one way of thinking that you're walking the path, but it's just that, it's thinking. So path realization goes beyond that. Again, Laura, you might want to look at our website and the Q&As there, because we do speak to that in different answers as well. It's probably as much as I can say this morning in terms of difference and non-difference. Every teacher, in fact, even if you look around the world today, every Buddhist teacher has a different way of expressing the Dharma, usually based on their own experience and understanding. But at the basis of it, you can see that it all comes back to the Buddha's teaching, and they may be using the paradigms of the Buddha, but they're expressing it in different ways and highlighting slightly different points. And similarly, all Advaita teachers, they might be teaching Advaita, but they're highlighting something different based on their experience. And they're using the basic ingredients, if you like, and they're creating a new, slightly different cake. So this is the same within traditions as well as across traditions. So the interesting thing with Samanera Jayasara's YouTube channel, because she uploads wisdom teachings of all different traditions, when you spend a lot of time listening to those, it eventually becomes quite clear that all these different ways of speaking, all these different words, these different paradigms and different concepts, they're still all pointing to exactly the same truth to be realized, just cloaked in different words. Yeah, we're cloaking this in just, it's like different clothes. Okay. Are we naturally enlightened by focusing on the awareness? Or do we still need to purge our thoughts and judgments in our head, like bad blood, in order to uncover the true nature or Kensho? Well, as we practice Ethan, this all happens. The so-called purging, just looking at as I discussed earlier about mindfulness, awake, practicing being awake in the present moment, being aware of what's happening in terms of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, and knowing, and eventually descending that which knows, that which is aware. All of this has a cleansing effect. It's just a cleansing effect of awareness, inherent wisdom, or the understanding that arises due to the clarity that is arising. But if we're not seeing something, then we don't really have an opportunity to understand it. So if your mindfulness isn't there, then you're not seeing what's there to be seen, to be understood. So the Buddha's paradigm, if you maybe tune into the Buddha Dharma series, and the basic paradigm of the Four Noble Truths, really utilizes this experience of dukkha for waking up. The experience of dukkha or unsatisfactoriness or suffering. Learning to recognize that as a place of waking up is very, very useful, because that experience of dukkha or suffering is indicative of clinging, of identification. So it's actually a signpost saying, well, have a look at this, look here. If you don't look there, you won't understand dukkha, you won't see its arising, you won't see its cessation, you won't understand freedom from dukkha, you won't understand all of that. Our conditioned activity of mind is to actually run away from dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, unpleasantness. We're conditioned to move away from that and to seek happiness in sense pleasure. That's just the way the mind has been conditioned. So we want to see that. We don't want to judge it. This is good, this is bad. We just want to see it. We want to understand it, what's going on here. And understand for ourselves what does dukkha taste like? What does freedom from dukkha taste like? Once the mind understands, has insight, this natural inclination to be free of suffering results in the path developing in terms of now we understand that suffering isn't allayed through judging it or pushing it away or trying to get rid of it or ignoring it. It's only allayed through understanding what it is and how it manifests. So the path develops naturally from that. Not as a big project now I've got to do in order to get somewhere else, but just through understanding that freedom is only here and now. It's never, ever, ever in the future. If you've got a futurized project going on, you're already in experience of dukkha. So we have to recognize that. Direct path, non-duality is different to the progressive path. I think you're just trying to clarify your earlier question, Laura, which I think I may have clarified. Yeah, there's these conceptual notions of gradual path, progressive path versus direct path or the pathless path. If you get stuck in conceptualizing all of that, you're still stuck in the whole dualistic thing. There is progression, there is progressive understanding, but it's not gained through thinking I am someone who's got to do something in order to get something else or somewhere else. So this again has to be understood with direct insight, direct knowing, direct understanding. So just as I instructed in the meditative process, that was a process. It had a beginning and an end and about 35, 40 minutes as a process. But did I ever direct you to imagine a future goal within that 40 minutes? Did I ever direct you to imagine what the end point of that meditation was going to be like? And yet the mind began in a certain state, experienced certain things, and the meditation ended with the mind in a certain state. That's a progression. But never within any moment of that meditation were we conceiving of progression, but just recognizing now, what's happening now, being present. Insight may arise, may have arisen. Insight may not have arisen. What is a cessation? Cessation is a translation of the word nirodha. Again, it's a word that's used differently in different traditions. The way the Buddha in early Buddhist teachings refers to cessation, it's on a spectrum. We can talk about the cessation of suffering, which is an insight. It's the third noble truth. We can also recognize the cessation of everything that appears in the moment, not conceptually, but see that as something appears, it also ceases. This is the territory where insight and understanding of cessation can arise, or can, insight arises and ceases too, because it is, well, it's in two senses. Insight can be direct, as in a direct seeing, and then moments later it can be conceived, as in concept. Concept arises and ceases. It has its use in being able to communicate and in understanding things conceptually, but direct seeing is a kind of a understanding that transcends language. So how do we overcome our karmic habits? Even though we may be able to listen to teachings from great masters and perhaps gain insights from them, when obstacles arise, our old habits come back. Well, there's also lots of teachings on how to overcome, in this view, how to overcome our karmic habits. You've got to listen to teachings, let them guide you. As I've said, just when something presents itself, be with it. If you kind of freak out, say, oh, it's a karmic obstruction, I've got to get away from it, I've got to cut through it, I've got to push, I've got to pull, what's the result of the way you're relating to this present moment experience? It all comes back to, if you want, we can talk about the path as right relationship. How am I relating to this in this moment? What's arising in this moment? How does it appear as a so-called obstruction? Is that an idea of what is actually presenting? Is it a sensation? Is it a feeling tone? Is it experience of pleasure, pain? Is it an idea? Is it desire? Is it anger? Is it sight, sound, smell, taste, touch? What are we calling obstruction? Is it, you're talking about the 5 hindrances, restlessness, desire, doubt, aversion? Just look into what your experience is. If you find that way of looking, obstructions dissolve as much as non-obstruction. If it's a really strong habitual activity that causes pain, then you have got to look into it. How is it arising? How is it sustained? How is it relaxed out of? How do I shift attention in a skillful way that allows a relaxing out? So I don't know if you've looked at this as just one resource. Obviously, all the teachings that are offered are great resources for this, allowing our attention to shift out of fixated patterns. It's all there. But on our website, there's a series of brief meditations called Embodying Awareness and Kindness. And that talks you through how to meet experience in a way that allows it to open out. So see how you do that. See if you can tune into that. So, could you suggest a practical approach to integrate all these maps of reality from different teachings? They all sound solid, but it's quite confusing. Also, what's your take on Paticca Samuppada? I love these questions. Just in a moment, explain Paticca Samuppada or sum up all these different teachings. Well, the channel, Samaneri Jayasara's channel, is offering just listen to the teachings and look at impatience. I got to get out right now. There's just here, there's just now. Everything else is this construct, mental construct. If there's confusion, how does that feel? It's also a mind state. What's impatience feel like? Is often arising from an aversion to what's presenting in the present. So we have to learn how to relax first with this body and this mind. And it doesn't always appear that we can. Don't make a problem of that, but rely on these teachings to find a way to be with. And often it's hard by oneself. So there's all these teachings, so many teachings on Jayasara's channel. They're all like dewdrops of Dharma nectar. Listen to them. Let them wash over you. Understanding will naturally arise. Insight will arise. Don't be in a hurry to get somewhere else, because that's just another habitual movement of the mind. It's all here. What you're looking for is here and now. The different teachings can be confusing if you're grasping at the words, and it does take some time to get a hang of what these words are pointing to. They're coming from different languages, different cultures. So initially, if you're finding it really confusing, just listen to, say, a stream of teachings that you can relate to more easily, whether it's Theravada, Dzogchen, Christian mysticism, or Sufi path. Find someone that you can relate to, where the language feels like it flows more smoothly, and listen intently. Be with. And then gradually, as you feel inclined or intuitively, listen to some other things. If they create confusion, just know, well, it's like that. I don't understand that yet, but don't struggle too much to understand it conceptually. Just let it be. The words are just like the shimmers on the ocean when the sun's shining, and all the different ripples on the ocean are, reflecting the sun, all these different shimmers. There's so many different words and concepts, but it's just the reflection of the sun on the surface, the ocean, a bit of wind. So just relax with those words and concepts and enjoy the sun, the sea, the air. Enjoy the beauty in the context of these spiritual teachings pointing to freedom. Just in that, you might not understand, get to the root of a particular concept or word. Don't believe the mind that feels it can only be satisfied by conceptually understanding something. This is possibly one of the diseases, deeply rooted diseases of our times. We want to know with the thinking mind. But even when you really find you comprehend something through thought, yeah, that feels great. How long does that last? Oh, and then there's another confusion. Then I have to think this through. And it's another sense base, this mental movement of the mind, and it consumes concepts and ideas just like we consume nice food through the mouth. The satisfaction doesn't last long. We're searching for something more to eat. The mind wants to eat concepts, and it thinks it gets satisfied that way, but it's very temporary. And so it's caught in this searching, eating, want more. So the place of not wanting more is below that. How else can I say it? It's neither below or above, but it's not in that, not in the eating, in the resting. Looking more to the sky, the ocean, the sun, the sea, the sand, the wholeness of it, rather than trying to figure out all the little reflections on the surface of the ocean. And then when there's deeper understanding, conceptual comprehension arises as a result, but you don't attach to that. It's just another expression. How is there so much change, birth, growth, decay, death in that which does not come and go? How can awareness create? It's just the way it is. This realm, the conditioned and the unconditioned. That's just the way it is. That's just what we're seeing. It's how it is. It's not within our control. Why do you want to know why and how? That's just the way it is. Okay. Hello from Iran. Nice to see you tuning in. Thanks for your reflection. So, dear Ayya, I, as Eve, the body-mind, take no real thoughts or action. It is the universal flow flowing through this instrument I call Eve, like a flute. Yes. Yes, yes. And yet, who is Eve? I and Eve are also other kinds of conceptual constructs. So, and one thing to mention, which myself and Jayasari watched an old documentary on the life and times of Chogyam Trungpa yesterday, so that's very current in my mind. Reflecting on, certainly as a monastic, there is a need for maintaining a recognition of our activity in the world and its results, and to have the intention to, as far as possible, to cultivate skillful action of body, speech, and mind, which means action that is not harmful, that doesn't cause harm, that doesn't give rise to more greed, hatred, and delusion. I think it's such an important thing to emphasize in this day and age with the melting pot of spiritual traditions is, right action or morality, ethics, bodhicitta, that which comes from a desire to bring benefit rather than harm. That this body mind, even though it is a flow of being, of existence, and some people have different ideas about whether we have free will or not, and whether we should just let all our desires flow, and whether we should restrict ourselves or not. From my perspective, from the perspective of the Buddha's teachings, recognizing wholesome action of body, speech, and mind is at the root of the path of liberation. It's not that we're condemning unwholesome actions, because we're all got a mixed bag, and until we're fully awakened, we're engaging in wholesome and unwholesome activity. But as far as we can consciously give rise to intention, allow that intention for the well-being of oneself and others, to be at the fore. And where we see our actions of body, speech, and mind create pain or suffering, here or with others, learn from that. Recognize it's not something that the Buddha encouraged us to perpetuate. He said, when you see that something causes harm, suffering in oneself or others, arising from your own actions of body, speech, and mind, then practice to refrain from doing that. Not out of judgment or aversion, but simply because we don't want to cause harm. We're practicing the path of freedom from suffering. There's so much that can be achieved in establishing this intention to refrain from behaving in ways that we understand are harmful. And now our restraint and refraining powers may be limited, but at least we're willing to learn, because that's really where the true spiritual power comes from, is in our deepening understanding. It's not through saying or telling ourselves this is right, this is wrong, but in some cases people need such black and white boundaries. And we have the opportunity for that until understanding arises internally. There are these basic 5 precepts which are intended to help guide people in their decision-making processes in life and learn from where we go wrong. Be willing to learn, be humble enough to learn. And we can set intention to direct energy. And what better way to direct energy than for the benefit of all beings? From a humble place, not a notion of I'm right, you're wrong, this is good, this is bad, but purely from that empathic place of not wishing to harm, where there's other options, a lot of other options. How can I reconcile the complete emptiness, nothingness I sometimes feel during meditation with my belief in God? Well, it depends. Do you mean complete emptiness, nothing? How do you mean emptiness, nothing? For some people, emptiness and nothingness is God. It's blissful. It's the ultimate bliss. For some people, they describe emptiness and nothingness as a kind of a depressive place. So I'm not quite sure exactly what your question in terms of emptiness and nothingness is pointing to. Is it the sense of hollow depression, the kind of annihilationist position? Or is it the bliss of no thingness, of the true nature of all things, which, when you listen to the Christian mystics, is God? Okay, so conversation going on there with a few people. I'll leave that with you all. I just lost my place here. Yeah. Okay, do the masters imply that awareness comes from somewhere other than the brain? Oh, yes, brain is just part of the body. It's just a kind of central headquarters. It's certainly a factor of conditioned consciousness, but awareness itself is not dependent on body, let alone brain. Dear Ayya, oh well, you may think I'm an enlightened being. Rushki. But anyway, wisdom doesn't belong to anyone. Let's hope that we're all channels of wisdom. The possibility we're all channels for that wisdom. I've been practicing in this field for a long time, so I have the benefit of age and a certain amount of experience. I have certainly not taken in the full range of experience to know the fullness that the Buddha knew. Someone's kind of saying, does knowing element equal pure consciousness? Yes, although it can be used both ways as well. And this is very, very hard to explain in words. Because in let's say this much, sense consciousness is dependent on, is still related to the knowing element, which is pure awareness, pure consciousness, like the wave is related to the ocean. So in that sense, there's a separateness, but there's a non-separateness, ultimately speaking. And metaphors and analogies can only get so far as well. Marion's quoting Nick Cave, I never will be free if I'm not free now. There's deep, deep, deep truth in that. Many spiritual masters talked about that as well. Okay, seeing if there's more questions here. There's some appreciation. Surrender whatever appears, I can't change. Very good. The embodied awareness of, someone saying the embodied awareness meditations have been very beneficial for me. Sometimes listening to them all in order or just picking one or two. Great. Good. I think we're getting to the end of our, no, nearing the end of our questions. People, not sure what time it is yet, coming up to 2 hours. So a lot of people are just chiming in with comments, which I won't read. You can all read that. Can an ex-alcoholic become enlightened? Or can be next Samara illusion without alcohol? I'm not absolutely sure of that question, but of course an ex-alcoholic can become enlightened. No bounds. In fact, they may have an advantage because they know deeply, or can come to know deeply, the truth of dukkha and how the mind is patterned. And so they can have an advantage if they're really bent on awakening. Well, thanks, Louis, for your comment. So Dylan is saying, by nothingness, I mean in like an all-pervasive zero kind of way. I guess it gets in the way of my notion of a dualistic God outside myself. Yes, it should, because a dualistic God is just a construct of mind. Listen to the Christian mystics, how they move through. They can use the words that evoke a sense of a dualistic God, but the insight is very much the non-dual God. And so you look at your own thoughts, how you can create that sense of, that's a conditioned process, and the culture supports that dualistic notion of God outside oneself. But even when you come back to Jesus' words of the kingdom of heaven is within you, or you probably said many other things I'm not aware of that point to the same truth, but the Christian mystics also discovered this, that at a certain point, the fixation on an objective outside God can become an obstruction, or rather that obstruction or that notion collapses, just like the notion of time and space, distance collapse, because it is a construct, it is a thought, it is a concept. It has its usefulness, but at some point you see through it and you find a deeper connection, deeper understanding when mind moves through that. In prayer, I've always felt a fullness that feels different than the all-pervasive nothingness. Maybe it's the same, but the taste is different. That's right, maybe it's the same and the taste is different. So this is where we just continue to inquire, look into, contemplate the experience that's arising for us. And this personally, this is where I find that signpost of dukkha can be very helpful. If there's a shutting down of the heart in any way, or what I call a squeeze on the heart, that's a recognition of something to be let go of, something to be released, not to be collapsed in on further, but just breathe with and see it dissolve. Yeah. So Dylan continues, I guess I'm asking the difference between 1 and 0. 1 and 0 are just words. They're describing certain experiences that you've had. But right now, is there 1? Or is there 0? Or is there 2? So we just continue. We might have had an experience of 1 in the past, or an experience of 0. The memory of that is a memory here and now. This is just the way it is now. So we don't try to get back to, or we inevitably find ourselves trying to get back to memories of how it was in the past when we felt we had something or got something. We try to recreate it, but we notice that that is just a movement of the mind kicking up dust. What was recognized and penetrated to is always ever present. We may not be able to see it right now, but chasing a memory or trying to recreate something based on that memory does not allow the mind to rest into natural recognition or truth. So we trust that what's real is here. We recognize power of awareness and presence and continue to practice resting into that until realization fully dawns. Okay, so we've arrived more or less at the end. Someone's saying, why is there no unified global method of achieving enlightenment? There are a lot of different traditions and religions. I find it difficult to make sense of that. Don't try to make sense of it. All these places were separated in the past. They've developed their ways and means in geographically separated places with their own cultural influences and meaning, language. So the differences are just the words. The trajectory is usually moving in the same direction. But if we get stuck on words and concepts, that's what creates confusion. Like I said before, stick with something for a while that speaks to you more easily. And now and again, open up to the different streams and see if you can see. The more you listen, the more you practice, the more you see the sameness. What seems quite different in the beginning can seem very similar later on. Okay, we're going to wind up now. One of the Christian mystics spoke of the Godhead, that which precedes a dualistic form of God. Yes, most of the mystics did. Great. thank you, everybody, for engaging in this. Really appreciate your presence and your inquiry and your questions. Please make use of all the resources on this YouTube channel and our guided and our website. The doubts will eventually get resolved. Sometimes a doubt, if taken into your meditation, can be a useful inquiry. At other times, doubt is just a gnawing hindrance that can be relaxed out of. It's just a movement of the mind that plays endless tennis match, and it's quite annoying. But if we're attached to that, if we're identified with that, then we keep suffering with it. Or just learn to rest out of it. Recognize doubt as a mind state. Stay present with it, breathe with it, and then it dissolves. Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. All blessings to you. Next 2 weeks, in 2 weeks' time, our next session is going to be the 4th in the series of Buddha Dharma series. So I hope that you all can join in then. And until then, be well, be kind, be peaceful. Take good care. Bye for now.